Sāñkhya and Tantra are two traditional systems of Vedic philosophy. Sāñkhya recognizes 24 categories within matter, while Tantra recognizes 36. Out of those 36 recognized in Tantra, the 24 Sāñkhya categories are common. In this video, we will discuss these two systems. Whenever necessary, we will note which parts come from Sāñkhya and which ones from Tantra. A good understanding of these two systems is essential to know how Vedic philosophy describes the origin of the material world and how that world comprises multiple layers of development from a primordial state of matter. As a point of contrast, matter exists at only one tier in modern science. However, matter is hierarchical in the Vedic tradition. Sāñkhya and Tantra describe this hierarchy. The difference between Sāñkhya and Tantra is rather subtle. Sāñkhya describes components of subconscious and conscious experience. Tantra instead goes deeper into the preconscious and the unconscious realm, but accepts the Sāñkhya description of the subconscious and the conscious realm. Both systems discuss the progressive manifestation of their respective components. In that sense, Tantra goes even deeper than Sāñkhya. The understanding of Tantra greatly illuminates Sāñkhya. Therefore, discussing a combination of the two has greater value. We have to remember that both systems talk about how a person is entangled in the material world. Matter in both systems is a covering of an eternal person or the soul. Therefore, matter has no independent existence apart from the soul. If there is no soul, then there is no matter. This is a radical departure from the modern way of thinking about matter as observer-independent objects. Even many of those who study Sāñkhya or Tantra at present tend to think of matter as something observer-independent rather than observer-dependent. Therefore, discrimination is required even while listening to people talking about Sāñkhya or Tantra. Not everyone talking about these subjects honestly represents the subject just the way it is. They mix their modern science ideas of observer-independent reality with Sāñkhya or Tantra when such a reality doesn't exist. Their preconception of matter drawn from modern science has no relation to Sāñkhya or Tantra. It must be noted that an observer-dependent reality doesn't mean solipsism or that only one observer exists. In both Sāñkhya and Tantra, there are infinite observers. In both Sāñkhya and Tantra, there is something publicly observable rather than just privately experienced. And yet, the foundation of both the public and the private reality is an observer. In fact, the publicly observable reality emerges out of the privately experienced reality. This is sometimes stated simply as the body emerging out of the mind. If there is no mind, then there is no body. Similarly, if there is no soul, then there is no mind. Therefore, the soul is the foundation of all material reality, including the mind and the body. This has to be always remembered while studying Sāñkhya and Tantra. Let's begin with the discussion of the Absolute Truth. The Absolute Truth is defined as Satchit Anand. We can call that justice, truth, and beauty. We can also call that right, truth, and good. Justice is the initial understanding of the Absolute Truth. Justice takes a person to the truth. When the understanding of truth is perfected, then that truth is recognized as beauty. We can also say that the journey of perfection begins with a moral life. Once a person becomes moral, then he understands the truth. Once his understanding of truth is perfected, then he perceives the truth as beauty. Therefore, the same thing is justice, truth, and beauty. Justice is the remote understanding of the absolute truth. Truth is a better understanding, and beauty is the best understanding. Some people equate the absolute truth to God although God and absolute truth are not the same. God is defined as omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and omniscient person. Each of these three definitions are rejected in the absolute truth understanding. For example, the absolute truth is not omnibenevolent because he is justice. An omnibenevolent God forgives people's sins contrary to justice. In contrast, the justice aspect of the absolute truth requires a person to correct himself. Therefore, when the justice aspect of the absolute truth is understood, then omnibenevolence is rejected. Similarly, the absolute truth is not omniscient because he is truth. The truth has no interest in falsehoods. The truth separates itself from falsehoods. That separation means a neglect of falsehoods. When the truth aspect of the absolute truth is understood, then omniscience is rejected. Finally, the absolute truth is not omnipotent because he is beauty. The absolute truth attracts everyone by his beauty. He doesn't need to use his power because he is irresistibly attractive. When the beauty of the absolute truth is understood, then omnipotence is rejected. Therefore, God is not absolute truth. And yet, because most people don't know what the absolute truth is, therefore the term God is often used to communicate with those who don't know the absolute truth. The God aspect of the absolute truth primarily manifests in the material world, where power is used to reward and punish the soul. Every action is recorded for future reward and punishment. God's compassion in the material world is giving justice to each person according to their actions. However, these things are not done by the absolute truth. They are rather done by the material energy. The material energy is omniscient and omnipotent. However, the material energy doesn't forgive the sins. Still, she is called Mother Nature because she punishes the child to correct him. There is compassion in the mother towards her child. There is also punishment given by the mother to correct the child. Compassion and punishment exist simultaneously. It means that the punishment is minimized to whatever necessary for correction. The punishment is not eternal. It is proportionate to one's deeds and removed when the living entity is corrected. Thus, when the idea of omnipotence exists, then the idea of omnibenevolence is modified to that of a punishing mother. When omnibenevolence exists in the transcendental world, omnipotence is absent. Hence, there is nothing that is at once omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent. And yet, we use the term God to refer to the absolute truth for those who don't understand it. The absolute truth can be defined as the perfect person. He is perfect in every way. This perfection can be divided into six parts, namely relations, emotions, intentions, cognitions, conations, and will. Perfect relation means that the absolute truth is satisfied in relationship to himself, and everyone in relationship to him needs no other relationship. Perfect emotion means that he is always full of bliss, and anyone who associates with the absolute truth also becomes full of bliss. Perfect intention means that the absolute truth wishes everyone well. He doesn't want to hurt anybody. He has no malice. He never intends anything harmful to himself and therefore has no death desire. Perfect cognition means that he knows himself perfectly, and this knowledge is all the truth there is to be known. Anyone who knows him knows the perfect truth. Perfect action means that whatever he does is executed perfectly without any flaw. There are no adverse outcomes as a result of his actions. He makes no mistakes. Finally, perfect will means that he never chooses imperfection over perfection. He is never tempted by delusion, cruelty, or immorality. He always chooses perfection. These six aspects of the perfect person are combined into three aspects called Sat, Chit, and Anand. The relational aspect is called Sat, the cognitive and conative aspect is called Chit, and the intentional, emotional, and willing aspect is called Anand. This makes the understanding slightly simpler. Accordingly, the perfect person is also called the supreme person, the original person, and the complete person. The original person is the creator aspect of the perfect person. The supreme person is the controller aspect of the perfect person. The complete person is the enjoyer aspect of the perfect person. Therefore, the absolute truth is also defined as the creator, controller, and enjoyer of everything. When applied to himself, the perfect person is his own creator, controller, and enjoyer. His innate bliss is so great that he needs nobody else. He is fully satisfied with himself. And yet, he creates a world because there is something beyond self satisfaction. You might ask, what is beyond self satisfaction? The answer is loving devotion. The Absolute Truth creates a world to enjoy loving devotion. This world comprises living entities with the same sixfold capacities for will, intention, emotion, cognition, conation, and relation. However, once the Absolute Truth creates such a world, some living entities prefer self satisfaction over loving devotion. Even other living entities develop a desire to become like the Absolute Truth. The Absolute Truth accepts the consequences of his actions because loving devotion cannot be forced. If a living entity wants self satisfaction, there is a world for that. If a living entity wants to become the creator, controller, and enjoyer instead of loving devotion, then there is a world for that. Thus, from the Absolute Truth expand three kinds of realities, which we can call ideal, possible, and impossible. The ideal is loving devotion, the possible is self satisfaction, and the impossible is trying to become the creator, controller, and enjoyer. In Vedic texts, these are called bhakti, mukti, and bandhan, or devotion, liberation, and bondage. They are also called internal energy, marginal energy, and external energy. The external energy is the realm of impossibility and is also called the material world. In this world, the living entity tries to become the creator, controller, and enjoyer. If he behaves morally like the Absolute Truth, then he gains in power. He can go up to the status of Brahma, who is the creator, controller, and enjoyer of one universe. But all these positions are temporary. They may last millions, billions, or trillions of years, but ultimately they end. Even the position of self satisfaction is temporary. Only loving devotion is eternal. The three kinds of realms expanded from the Absolute Truth are simply different aspects of the Absolute Truth. They can be understood using the analogy of an ordinary thing like a pen. Ideally, it is a pen. Possibly, it is a toy. And impossibly, it is a car. Someone can sit on top of the pen and pretend that it is a car. He can pull the pen forward and backward and pretend that the car is moving. All that is a self created delusion. The pen will never be a car. A pen can possibly be a toy. That is not a complete delusion. However, we cannot get much fun out of playing with a pen. We can play with a pen for some time and then it will end. A pen is ideally only a pen. In the same way, eternal devotion is the ideal state. Self satisfaction is temporarily possible, and trying to become the creator, controller, and enjoyer is a pure delusion. If we understand that a pen is not a car, we know the truth. If we know that the pen is possibly a toy, again we know the truth. But these are not ideal truths. The ideal truth is that pen is just a pen. In this way, there is one perfect truth, many possible truths, and many impossible truths. They are the three aspects of the absolute truth. The material realm exists for the living entity to pretend for some time that he is a creator, controller, and enjoyer. To fulfill this delusion, the living entity has to work very hard to earn his status. He does not become the creator, controller, and enjoyer just by wishing it. Rather, he is required to make sacrifices to acquire the status of a creator, controller, and enjoyer. The absolute truth did not have to earn his status as a creator, controller, and enjoyer, but the living entity has to earn his status. Whatever the living entity earns is temporary. It is spent, lost, and destroyed. Due to continuous destruction of the previously created things, it is not possible to create just once and enjoy forever. One has to constantly keep creating in order to continue enjoying. Thus, a schism is created between creating, controlling, and enjoying. If we are creating new things, then we are not enjoying existing things. Those things that we created in the past are being destroyed while we are busy creating new things. Then, if we start enjoying the previously created things, then those things are destroyed even faster while we are not creating new things. If we become busy maintaining existing things, then we are not creating new things and not enjoying existing things. Thus, it is impossible to be creator, controller, and enjoyer simultaneously. Due to the continuous destruction of what has been created previously, the living entity suffers from great fear and anxiety. He is always afraid that his creations are futile. If he enjoys, then they will be lost quickly. If he doesn't enjoy them, they will still be lost, and he would have worked in vain. The main cause of fear and anxiety is time, which continuously destroys the living entity's creations. The living entity gets exhausted by the process of continuous creation for short term enjoyment. He lives in the fear of losing everything that he has previously created. This fear makes the living entity feel helpless, inadequate, and incapable of fighting the inexorable onslaught of time. He wanted to be like the absolute truth, but he is diminished to nothing by time. This feeling of nothingness is called Maya. The living entity is actually small, but small is not nothing. Small is also not supreme. In trying to become supreme, the small becomes nothing. Thus, the material world is described as the interplay of three agencies: 1. Time that destroys everything; 2. Maya or the feeling of nothingness; and 3. The small living entity trying to become supreme. Big Bang cosmologists say that the world came out of nothing. Buddhists also say that the world came out of nothing and returns to nothing. But in Vedic texts, the material world comes out of the feeling of nothingness. The living entity feeling that nothingness is not nothing. The time that destroys everything is also not nothing. Even that feeling of nothingness is imposed on the living entity by Maya, which is also not nothing. Therefore, the world did not come from nothing. However, it comes from the feeling of nothingness. The difference is subtle but very important. We can look at a great person and be inspired to love them and serve them. This is the ideal state. But sometimes we can look at a great person and realize that we will never be like them. We feel disappointed and decide to not look at the great person to avoid the feeling of personal inadequacy. Thereby, we withdraw into our shell. This is not ideal, but it is possible. Then we can look at a great person and become envious of their status. We decide to become like them and displace them from their status. This is impossible when that great person is the absolute truth. When a small person accepts his small status humbly, then the presence of a great person has a rejuvenating, inspiring, and accelerating effect on the small person. This is called the internal energy. Under its influence, the small person is excited and happy to serve the great person. When a small person accepts that he is small but is not comfortable with it, then the presence of a great person has a disappointing, withdrawing, and isolating effect on the small person. This is called the marginal energy. The small person withdraws from the great person and becomes self absorbed. Finally, when a small person is unable to accept that he is small, then the presence of a great person has an envious, rebellious, and infuriating effect on the small person. This is called external energy. The small person is infuriated by the fact that he is not great and decides to prove his superiority to everyone by establishing his greatness and displacing the great person. The material energy is therefore divided into three stages. The first stage is a person feeling inferior. The second stage is a person feeling infuriated by his perceived humiliation and deciding to prove his superiority. The third stage is a struggle to establish his superiority, which always fails and then takes him back to the feeling of inferiority. From this inferiority again springs another angry state to establish superiority, which then leads to a new struggle to establish superiority, which again fails to establish superiority, putting him back to the feeling of inferiority. This tripartite division of matter is called Maya, Shakti, and Prakriti. Maya is the feeling of inferiority, Shakti is the feeling of superiority, and Prakriti is the failed struggle to establish superiority. The Shakti, Prakriti, and Maya description can also be understood through the Satchidanand triad. The deep rooted feeling of inferiority is the unhappiness in the person called Maya. From this inferiority springs anger, which is the power to gain mastery and is called Shakti. From this Shakti ensues the struggle for existence, trying to establish one's superiority, and is called Prakriti. Shakti is discussed extensively in the Shakta texts, Prakriti is discussed extensively in the Vaishnava texts, and Maya is discussed extensively in the Shaiva texts. The subject matter is so complex that it requires separate texts. We can understand this complicated subject in simple terms by realizing that a living entity feels inferior, then decides to become superior by its own power, struggles to establish superiority, but ultimately fails in that attempt and returns back to the state of inferiority. The Shakta, Vaishnava, and Shaiva texts are not saying contradictory things. They are talking about the different stages of a very complex process. If the big picture of the material struggle is understood, then we can better understand the details within each of these descriptions. I will divide the detailed description of the various parts of the material energy into four categories. I will call these the unconscious, the preconscious, the subconscious, and the conscious realities, respectively. These are not Vedic terms, but they are easier to remember and understand for those who might not be well versed with terms like Maya, Shakti, and Prakriti. Maya is the unconscious, Shakti is the preconscious, Prakriti is the subconscious, and the conscious. Almost all of it is a private reality. Only at the last stage of the conscious reality development do we get something public. Therefore, if the study of matter is limited to public reality, disregarding the enormous complexity that lies in the private realm, then the true enormity of the material energy is not understood. Let's begin with the unconscious reality, which is called Maya. Maya is the perceived humiliation of the living entity in relation to the absolute truth. This perception is also a delusion because the absolute truth is just being himself rather than humiliating anyone else. But the living entity feels envious of the perfection in the absolute truth, and due to that envy, he is gripped by the feeling of powerlessness, worthlessness, and hopelessness, in contrast to the absolute truth. This negative feeling is Maya. It subdues the will of a person and makes him feel incapable. It has a paralyzing effect on a person because Maya makes a person unhappy. When a person is paralyzed due to a perceived self inadequacy, then he loses the capacity of will and starts feeling a nothingness. The will is one of the six aspects of a person, the other five being emotion, intention, cognition, connection, and relation. Therefore, when a person's will is humiliated, then the other five aspects are also constrained. The person feels bound and tied in various ways. These constraints are described extensively in Tantra texts and called Niyati, Raga, Vidya, Kala, and Kala. Niyati is the feeling that I don't deserve anything. Kala is the feeling that I have no power to do anything. Vidya is the feeling that I don't understand anything. Raga is the feeling that I don't enjoy anything. Kala is the feeling that I don't desire anything. We can understand the effect of Maya on a person by comparing it to the effect of a severe illness on the body. The whole body is paralyzed by illness. We lose the capacity to do anything, know anything, enjoy anything, want anything, and relate to anything. Sometimes a person feels he is going to die and he loses the desire to fight against the illness. Maya covers a living entity when it feels ashamed in relation to the absolute truth. The absolute truth is great and perfect. In contrast, the living entity feels that it is worthless. This, as we have discussed, is not necessary. The living entity can also be excited and motivated to serve the absolute truth after seeing its perfection and greatness. A person can also withdraw from that greatness to avoid having to face that greatness and perfection. He can then focus on his limited greatness and remain satisfied with it. In these cases, the person doesn't feel ashamed. Shame is the result of not feeling excited and motivated by the absolute truth, but rather becoming preoccupied with one's own imperfection and inferiority, and then becoming demotivated and depressed. This demotivated and depressed condition of the living entity is the state in which the universe doesn't exist. The living entity still exists, but it is so demotivated and depressed that it goes into the deep sleep state. The universe is annihilated, but the living entity is not freed from the material entanglement because of its own feeling of shame in comparison to the absolute truth. When the time for the creation of the universe arises, the living entity is woken up and stirred by Shakti or power. He feels energized and wants to conquer his feeling of shame. He proclaims that he is great, powerful, and capable. He wants to use his power to conquer his inferiority and establish his superiority. The feeling of empowerment is due to Shakti. When the Shakti is withdrawn, the living entity falls asleep because it is already depressed. But when the Shakti is imparted again, the living entity wakes up and develops the desire for establishing his superiority. This desire for superiority can be called the declaration of independence by the living entity. It is also called pradhana, which means the master, chief, or ruler. However, the Shakti with each living entity is very limited. It is further divided into six components pursuant to the six aspects of a person. The relational power is called karma. When this power is given, a living entity feels that there are opportunities for establishing his greatness. The intentional and emotional power is called prakriti. When this power is given, the living entity develops intentions for pleasure and starts enjoying the anticipation of its supremacy. The cognitive, conative, and willpower is called chitta. When this power is given, the living entity becomes capable of perceiving the material reality, creating the reality, and selecting or filtering parts of that material reality. The combination of chitta, guna, and karma is the sense in which the living entity is empowered to conquer his shame. We have to remember that even when the living entity is empowered with Shakti, his shame and inferiority have not disappeared. They have just been suppressed under the euphoria of power. Therefore, the moment a little bit of this power goes away, the living entity again falls into depression and nothingness. For example, when the opportunities created by karma disappear, then the living entity becomes depressed. He forgoes his resolve for enjoyment and loses interest in whatever enjoyment is available. He stops seeing greatness in the world, stops creating greatness, and stops choosing greatness. Therefore, shame and inferiority are always under the surface. They are temporarily suppressed due to the Shakti or power. The moment Shakti goes away, they reappear. Tantra philosophy goes deep into the analysis of this unconscious and preconscious reality. It explains why the living entity sometimes feels exuberant and motivated, and sometimes powerless and hopeless. The exuberant and motivated states are due to the presence of Shakti, and the powerless and hopeless states are due to the absence of Shakti that causes inferiority to resurface. The description of Maya is prominently found in the Shaiva Tantras, and the description of Shakti is prominently found in the Shakta Tantras. The Vaishnava Tantras prominently begin with the discussion of Chitta and what happens afterwards. This study is called Sāñkhya. In former times, when all the texts were studied simultaneously, there was a good understanding of all these texts combined together. At present, when the study of all the texts has declined, not many people are well versed in either Sāñkhya or Tantra, let alone a combination of both of these. Therefore, Sāñkhya and Tantra have come to be seen as different schools. Their followers and proponents have also separated. But if we understand them properly, that separation is neither necessary nor true. The Chitta is the material representation of the Chit aspect of the self. It is described in three ways in different places. Sometimes the Chitta is called a mirror that reflects reality. This represents the cognitive capacity of a person. Then the Chitta is compared to an ocean that generates waves. This represents the conative capacity of a person. Finally, the Chitta is compared to a veil that filters our cognitive and conative capacity. This represents the covering of the living entity that limits its abilities. We have earlier discussed the tripartite distinction between the ideal, the possible, and the impossible. The cognitive and conative capacities of the Chitta represent the ideal and the possible, whereas the filtering aspect represents the impossible aspect. The combination of the ideal, possible, and impossible creates a material embodiment of a constrained version of the Chit capacity of the self. We can call it the limited power within a person to know and act. From this combination of the ideal, possible, and impossible, the ideal separates as three components of Chitta called the Mahatattva, Ahankara, and Buddhi. Mahatattva is all the personal values, morals, and the sense of rightness and wrongness. Ahankara is the personal goals of goodness. Each person thinks that his self-interest is the highest good and the best goal. Ahankara is also a person's self-image. Each person thinks that he is a good person, the center of the world and the purpose for which everything exists. Therefore, ahankara is also called pride and ego. Finally, the buddhi is the collection of all beliefs. It constitutes what we consider to be the ideal truths. Whenever we create theories of reality, we axiomatize these personal beliefs as universal truths. Our beliefs about truth, the morals of rightness, and the goals of goodness are greatly influenced by our culture, society, civilization, ideology, and religion. Each culture, society, civilization, ideology, and religion creates beliefs about truths, morals of rightness, and goals of goodness. People living within a culture, society, civilization, ideology, and religion take their beliefs, morals, and goals to be ideal truths, rights, and goods. They remain unaware of other definitions of truth, right, and good. Therefore, the culture, society, civilization, ideology, and religion are sometimes considered our subconscious reality. We are not always aware of our personal beliefs, morals, and goals. We accept them by default. Therefore, they are the subconscious reality. This subconscious reality is used to judge whether something is true, right, and good. Since our beliefs, morals, and goals are accepted by default, therefore the judgments also happen by default. As many societies are becoming multicultural at present, the concept of subconscious bias has come to the forefront. The Mahatattva, Ahankara, and Buddhi are our subconscious bias. They are innate in each person, although they are greatly influenced by a person's culture, society, civilization, ideology, and religion. We can know them if we want, hence, they are not unconscious. The Mahatattva, Ahankara, and Buddhi are also the more manifest aspects of a person's superiority. People think that their morals, beliefs, and goals are superior to those of others. Mahatattva, Ahankara, and Buddhi are also sometimes called Prakriti instead of Shakti. This is not a contradiction if we understand the difference between the power to create beliefs, morals, and goals and the beliefs, morals, and goals created by that power. The sense of superiority comes from a greater estimation of one's power, and then superiority is imputed to the products of that power. All large civilizations consider themselves to be intellectually, morally, and intentionally superior. They think that they have greater powers to create beliefs, morals, and goals. The ideas, morals, and goals get imputed superiority as a result of their belief in their superior power. In modern time, for example, Western society considers itself to be racially, culturally, morally, intellectually, and intentionally superior than any other society. They go about spreading their civilization to the whole world because they think they are the superior civilization. This is because they have received the power of Shakti over the last few centuries. When that power of Shakti is taken away, then the same beliefs, morals, and goals lose the previously imputed superiority. Therefore, Shakti is the power and Prakriti is the byproducts of that power. The byproducts can exist even when the power is lost. Nobody cares about those byproducts when that happens. The distinction between Shakti and Prakriti is therefore often blurred. The same thing is called Prakriti in some places and then called Shakti in other places. The distinction is subtle but not irrelevant. Once we understand the unconscious, preconscious, and the subconscious, then we can discuss the conscious. It comprises the mind, senses, life force, properties, and their individual embodiments. In Sankhya, they are called Manas, Indriya, Prana, Tanamatra, and Bhuta. The Bhuta are the public or the external world. The Tanamatra are the properties of the world, namely the properties by which the world can be smelt, tasted, seen, touched, and heard. They exist both in the external world and in each person who perceives the world. Prana is the mechanism by which the senses and the mind interact with the world. Due to creating the interaction between the knower and known, The prana is neither confined to the knower or to the known. Indriya are the senses, namely hearing, touching, seeing, tasting, and smelling. Finally, the manas is the mind that combines the sensations obtained through the senses into a single object concept, such as a table or a chair. Thus, within the conscious realm, the bhuta are purely public. The tanmatra are both public and private. The prana is neither purely public nor purely private. The indriya and manas are purely private. Thus, the conscious realm is not easy to understand because it stretches from purely private to purely public, with both private and public, and neither private nor public realities. Anyone who thinks that they can model the conscious reality as either purely private or purely public will fail. Hence, neither pure realism nor pure idealism are true for conscious experience. The conscious reality, or what we have called actuality, can be divided into three components called manas, pran, and vak. The first comprises the mind and the senses, the second comprises the life force, and the third comprises the sense objects and their properties. This tripartite distinction can be called the distinction between the seer, seen, and seeing. The mind and the senses are the seer. The sense objects and their properties are the seen, and the life force is the power of seeing. Sāñkhya describes them as three aspects of the self-image or ahankara. The senses and the mind are the sattvic aspect of ahankara. The life force is the rajasic aspect of ahankara. The sense objects and their properties are the tamasic aspect of ahankara. The sattvic aspect of ahankara is the first person experience. The rajasic aspect of ahankara is the second person experience. The tamasic aspect of ahankara is the third person experience. Ahankara combines the first, second, and third person experiences. We can imagine the situation to be like a three-sided coin. Sattvic, Rajasic, and Tamasic are three sides, and Ahankara is the coin. We can illustrate this distinction by an example. Suppose we are looking at a bird. We can see the colored wings of the bird and how it flies. But we don't know what it means to be within the bird body. Only other birds can understand what it means to be in a bird body. However, even other birds cannot know exactly what a specific bird sees or thinks. Only a specific bird experiences its personal sensations and thoughts. Based on these distinctions, we can talk about first, second, and third person experiences. Humans looking at a bird is third person experience. A bird looking at another bird is second person experience. And each bird experiencing their private and personal sensations and thoughts is the first person experience. The Ahankara is the self image of a living entity. The self image is divided into three components to constitute the first, second, and third person experiences. They are all part of the Ahankara and yet not the same. We can also call these three the individual reality, the contextual reality, and the universal reality. The wings of the bird are universal reality because anyone can observe them. One bird understanding another bird is contextual reality because only birds can understand that. Finally, the personal experience of a bird is individual reality because only that bird understands it. The contextual reality denotes that which everyone cannot understand, but those embedded in the same culture, society, religion, ideology, civilization, or the type of mind and body can understand. Their understanding is approximate rather than precise. For example, someone who has had fever before can understand what someone else who has fever currently is experiencing. This is an approximate idea and is called anumana. in Vedic epistemology. It is not blind speculation, it is a reasonable guess. Someone who has never had fever cannot even understand what it means to have fever, but he can measure the body temperature. Therefore, body temperature is third person experience. Knowing what it means to have fever is second person experience. And experiencing fever is first person experience, which is also called pratyaksha. Our personal identity comprises these three components. But modern science just studies third person experiences. It can measure temperature, but it has no idea how it feels to have fever. The second and first person experiences are disregarded by modern science. So far, we have discussed the different components of experiences. We call them unconscious, preconscious, subconscious, and conscious realities. We divided them into multiple parts such as the mind, the senses, the properties, sense objects, and so on. Now we will talk about how the six aspects of a person are reflected in each of these components. This can be illustrated through an analogy. Suppose you look at yourself in a mirror. You see parts of your body such as head, hands, legs, and stomach. Now imagine that each of these parts is in turn a mirror which reflects the whole of you within itself. Thereby, you will see an image of your hand, but within that hand, you will again see your head, hand, legs, and stomach. We can call this a recursive reflection of an image. The net result of the recursive reflection is that we cannot study anything in isolation because within each part is the reflection of the whole. For example, a hand is a part, but the whole body is reflected within the hand because the hand is not just a part of the reflected image but also a mirror in itself that in turn reflects the whole body. Thereby, we can say that the hand is a part of the whole body and the whole body is a part of the hand. Scientific reductionism assumes that the parts are in the whole, but the whole is not in the parts. In short, scientific reductionism assumes that matter is not like a mirror. For example, the mind could be a part of a person, but the person cannot be a part of the mind. This is false. The image of the whole is reflected within each part such that we can never separate the parts as independent things. Therefore, recursive reflection is the rejection of reductionism. No reductionist ideology can ever be used to understand the components of conscious experience correctly. Let's begin with the sixfold self being reflected in the Mahatattva. As noted earlier, the Mahatattva is the power of morality and the judgment of rightness. At present, morals are also called values. They include qualities such as truthfulness, kindness, austerity, and cleanliness. But people often create their own values such as liberty, equality, and fraternity. In fact, each person creates their personal values and judges others by their value system. For example, those with a value of equality refuse to see that people are born diverse and different. They judge diversity as something wrong or evil and try to create equality by force. Enormous cultural or social differences are created by people when they create their own value system without adequate justification. Mahatattva or the moral sense can be divided into cognition, condition, willing, relation, emotion, and intention of morals. The cognitive function of Mahatattva is the capacity to perceive morals in others and judge the rightness of different morals. The conative function of Mahatattva is the capacity to create personal morals and arguments or justifications for those morals being right. The willing function of Mahatattva is the capacity to choose some morals and disregard others. A person's own moral system becomes a filter for the moral system in others. A person is not able to understand the values or morals that others hold. He cannot imagine that someone else can have a different set of moral ideals. The relational function of Mahatattva is the capacity to group moral values into some culture and harmonize them together. For example, many people at present talk about Western values. They have harmonized a bunch of values held by Europeans and Americans into a value system. The emotional function of Mahatattva is enjoying the moral behavior by considering oneself righteous. For example, people enjoy doing those things that they consider morally righteous. They also enjoy those actions more that they consider more moral. Finally, the intentional function of Mahatattva is pursuing the establishment of a certain type of moral system and destroying all the other moral systems. For example, the West at present tries to universalize its moral value system to the rest of the world and tries to destroy all other moral value systems. Thus, morality is one component of a person, namely the instrument of judging rightness. But within this component are six divisions that reflect the six aspects of a person. Due to the presence of these six aspects within morality, we can say that the whole is in the parts. Likewise, by seeing rightness as one of the parts of a person, we can say that the part is in the whole. Every part of the whole is similar to the whole. If we wanted, we could further divide each of these six functions of morality into six further parts. By that, we can see literally infinite complexity within morality. Let's now turn to the sixfold self being reflected in the ahankara. As noted earlier, the ahankara is the power of making goals and the judgment of goodness. Everyone makes goals and considers their attainment goodness. However, the goals are not common for everyone. People often create their own goals, such as career, wealth, education, and so on. In fact, each person with different goals considers different things good or bad. They might also consider the same thing good or bad at different times, places, and situations based on their goals. They consider people with goals opposed to their goals as bad people, and those whose goals assist the attainment of their personal goals as good people. Thus, the judgment of good and bad is created by personal goals. Ahankara or the egocentricity can also be divided into cognition, connection, willing, relation, emotion, and intention. The cognitive function of ahankara is the capacity to perceive goals in others and judge the goodness of different goals. The conative function of ahankara is the capacity to create personal goals and arguments or justifications for those goals being good. The willing function of ahankara is the capacity to choose some goals and disregard others. A person's own goals become a filter for goals in others. He is not able to understand the goals or intentions others hold. He cannot imagine how someone can have a different set of goals. The relational function of ahankara is the capacity to group goals or intentions into some broader goal and by such convergence resolve the conflict between different goals. For example, a student may justify his socializing as simply building connections that will later prove useful in his education. The emotional function of ahankara is enjoying the behavior that leads to attainment of goals by considering it goodness. For example, people enjoy doing their jobs when they think they are going to attain their goals by doing it. They don't enjoy their work when it doesn't fulfill their goals. Finally, the intentional function of ahankara is making certain goals the de facto goals for others. For example, after attaining entrepreneurial success, a person may start believing that everyone should become an entrepreneur. Creating more entrepreneurs may become his goal. He would align and subordinate all other goals to this one goal of entrepreneurship. For example, education that helps entrepreneurship will become good and all other education will become bad. Thus, goals are one component of a person, namely the instrument of judging goodness. But within this component are six divisions that reflect the six aspects of a person. Due to the presence of these six aspects within goals, we can say that the whole is in the parts. Likewise, by seeing goals as one of the parts of a person, we can say that the part is in the whole. Every part of the whole is similar to the whole. If we wanted, we could further divide each of these six functions into six further parts. By that, we can see literally infinite complexity within the category of goals. Let's now turn to the sixfold self being reflected in the buddhi. As noted earlier, the buddhi is the power of creating beliefs and judging their truthfulness. Everyone makes beliefs and considers their propounding truthfulness. However, the beliefs are not common for everyone. People often create their own beliefs, such as the axioms of various scientific theories. In fact, each person with different beliefs considers different things true or false. They might also consider the same thing true or false at different times, places, and situations based on their beliefs. They consider those claims that are opposed to their beliefs as false, and those whose beliefs comport with their own beliefs as true. Thus, the judgment of true and false is created by personal beliefs. Buddhi or the intellect can be divided into cognition, conation, willing, relation, emotion, and intention. The cognitive function of the buddhi is the capacity to perceive beliefs in others and judge the truthfulness of different beliefs. The conative function of buddhi is the capacity to create personal beliefs and arguments or justifications for those beliefs being true. The willing function of buddhi is the capacity to choose some beliefs and disregard others. A person's own beliefs become a filter for beliefs in others. He is not able to understand the beliefs others hold. He cannot imagine that someone can have a different set of beliefs. The relational function of buddhi is the capacity to group beliefs into some broader ideology and by such convergence resolve the conflict between different beliefs. For example, a scientist combines many axioms into a single axiomatic framework to create a foundation for a theory. Sometimes, multiple axiomatic frameworks are combined into a larger ideology. The emotional function of buddhi is enjoying the activity of judging the truth based on one's belief system. For example, people enjoy creating theories when those theories align with their belief system. They don't enjoy such theories when they don't align with their beliefs. Instead, they try to find alternative explanations of the same observations based on a different belief system. Finally, the intentional function of buddhi is making certain beliefs the de facto universal truths for everyone. For example, after attaining limited success in some theory, a person wants to universalize his theory to everyone. He would then consider the spreading of his belief system, the spreading of the truth, and its reverse as the spreading of falsehoods. Thus, beliefs are one component of a person, namely, the instrument for judging truthfulness. But within this component are six divisions that reflect the six aspects of a person. Due to the presence of these six aspects within beliefs, we can say that the whole is in the parts. Likewise, by seeing beliefs as one of the parts of a person, we can say that the part is in the whole. Every part of the whole is similar to the whole. If we wanted, we could divide each of these six functions into six further parts. By that, we will see literally infinite complexity within the category of beliefs. Let's now turn to the sixfold self being reflected in the manas. As noted earlier, the manas is the power of thinking. It includes the capacity to understand ideas, create ideas, disregard ideas, harmonize ideas, enjoy thinking, and have the goals of spreading those ideas to others. Accordingly, manas or the mind can be divided into cognition, connection, willing, relation, emotion, and intention. The cognitive function of the mind is the capacity to perceive thoughts in others. It is also the capacity to see concepts like table and chair. The conative function of the mind is the capacity to create personal concepts and thoughts. The willing function of the mind is the capacity to select some ideas and reject others. A person's own thoughts become a filter for thoughts in others. He is not able to understand other people's ideas. He cannot imagine that someone can have different ideas. The relational function of manas or the mind is the capacity to group multiple ideas into a single idea. This capacity is used for stringing words into sentences, sentences into paragraphs, paragraphs into chapters, and chapters into books. It is used while stringing together musical notes into a song, or colors into a picture, or individual movements into a dance. The emotional function of manas is enjoying the activity of creating and understanding ideas. For example, people enjoy creating books, music, art, theorems, and theories. Everyone doesn't enjoy everything. They have a preference for a certain type of creativity and understanding. Finally, the intentional function of the manas is making certain ideological creations popular and long lived. Therefore, everyone tries to spread the products of their creativity to others. They spread their ideas by teaching them. Thus, thoughts are just one component of a person, namely, the instrument of creating and understanding ideas. But within this component are six divisions that reflect the six aspects of a person. Due to the presence of these six aspects within thoughts, we can say that the whole is in the parts. Likewise, by seeing thoughts as one part of a person, we can say that the part is in the whole. Every part of the whole is similar to the whole. If we wanted, we could divide the six functions into six further parts. By that, we can see literally infinite complexity within the category of thoughts. The same sixfold distinction exists in the senses. The senses have the capacity for intentions, feelings, creativity, cognition, filtering, and grouping. All these capacities can be understood just like the capacities of the mind. For example, the senses perceive percepts during waking. They create percepts during dreaming. When we focus on some percepts, other percepts are disregarded. Many percepts are combined into a more complex percept. The process of perceiving is enjoyed, and due to this enjoyment, one desires or intends to receive more such percepts. The prana or the seeing aspect is further divided into five parts, which are called Vyana, Udana, Prana, Samana, and Apana. The Vyana is called the moving prana. For example, when we move our eyes, we change our focus or attention. By that movement, our eyes attach to some reality, extract its properties, and bring them back to the senses. However, the senses may not exactly perceive the true property of something because there may be a bias in the senses as well. The property that Vyana brings interacts with the senses and the property is modified. The generation of the modified property in the senses is called Udana. Then the senses interact with the generated property to perceive it, which is also called prana. As the sense interacts with multiple sensations, samana is used to integrate them. The properties are modified during this integration. For example, something on a dark background looks closer, while something on a white background looks farther. This is the result of trying to integrate multiple sensations into a single complex sensation. Finally, some sensations or properties are disregarded while integrating. This process is called apana. Finally, the combination of these activities of moving, producing, perceiving, integrating, and filtering is enjoyed. that enjoyment is the whole purpose of the life force that divides into 5 parts. The process of perception is incredibly complicated. It is grossly simplified in modern science by saying that a photon enters our eyes and creates an impression that we just see it. By this photon explanation, we cannot explain how we focus and defocus our attention, how the biases in our senses change the external property, how we integrate multiple sensations and modify each sensation during the process of integration, how we discard those sensations that we are not able to integrate, how the combined sensation becomes a picture we see, and how the process of perceiving is enjoyment. Modern science just disregards the complexity in the perception and postpones it as yet another problem to be solved by the biologist, who then drops the ball. Tanamatra are the properties in the world. Based on the sixfold division in the self, these properties can also be divided into 6 parts as the reflection of the self in the material energy. For example, the intentional property of matter is the purpose in the world. The world is not purposeless. Everything exists for a purpose. The emotional property is the world's capacity to give us pleasure. The conative property in the world is its capacity to expand and contract. The cognitive properties include taste, touch, smell, sound, and sight. The filtering property is that each property selectively interacts with few properties and is changed by that interaction. The grouping property is that a bunch of these properties combine to create additional properties. The individual embodiments of these properties are called bhuta, or the sense objects. They have the same sixfold attributes as the properties and can be understood analogously. At present, many people want to study the bhuta in isolation from the senses and the mind. This is not a new thing. Even Greeks depersonalized the sense objects into mere objects. Thus, there are Greek elements called earth, water, fire, and air, but they were thought of as solidity, liquidity, heat, and motion, rather than the sense perceivable embodiments of smell, taste, sight, and touch. The same depersonalizing tendency of the Greeks exists at present. People want to understand the sense objects merely as objects because modern science studies them as objects. But there are serious reasons why sense objects are not scientific objects. For example, every sense object has a purpose within it. People create pens to be used as pens rather than as toys. When things are used for their intended purpose, they become long lived. If they are used for unintended purposes, then they are short lived. But in modern science, matter has no purpose. When we try to reduce sense objects to scientific objects, we cannot explain why things are long lived or short lived. Similarly, the cognitive properties in matter are smell, taste, sight, touch, and sound. They are not physical properties such as position and momentum. Then the sense objects can expand into more objects and contract into fewer objects. Due to this expansion and contraction of sense objects, matter is not conserved. New matter can be created. Created matter can disappear. In contrast, the conservation of matter is a fundamental postulate due to which mathematics is used for physical objects. That postulate is false for sense objects. Then physical matter has no grouping property. Physical forces are exerted uniformly on everything in the universe. But sense objects don't exert forces on everything in the universe. They selectively group into ensembles, and that selective grouping exists in the sense objects but not in the physical objects. Then, when different kinds of matter are mixed, they don't always interact with each other. For example, large biomolecules fold in a very specific way inside the body, and their biological function is the result of that folding. When the same biomolecule is taken out of the body, the folding pattern changes. Finally, physical matter has no pleasure in it. This is why when food is created artificially, then it has no pleasure. As a result, people eat a lot to get pleasure. But when food is created by nature, then it has innate pleasure. Then we have to eat very little of that naturally grown food. Everything created by nature has innate pleasure in it. This is why people like to experience nature. Their minds, disturbed by the absence of pleasure, become calm when they receive pleasure. Things coming out of the factory don't have pleasure. This is why we have to throw them away after some time. But we can enjoy gardens, forests, rivers, lakes, and mountains almost forever. Physical properties and physical objects cannot explain the true behavior of matter because science has stripped matter of its person inherited properties. And yet, due to rampant impersonalism inculcated by modern science and deeply assimilated by people who have studied science, there are attempts to model sense objects as physical objects. Those who try to reduce sense objects to physical objects are not looking at all the ways in which science is incomplete and incapable of explaining the observations. They depersonalize matter due to their impersonalist worldview. Just as each component of reality can be divided into many parts, similarly, these components can also be aggregated. The aggregations are called sharira or deha, which can be loosely translated as bodies. At present, when most people talk about a body, they mean the body comprised of the five elements called earth, water, fire, air, and ether. But that is not the only type of body. In the Vedic text, we find at least four different kinds of bodies, which are different from the living entity or the soul. They are layered on top of each other and progressively manifest from the previous body. The whole situation is therefore described just like the layers of an onion, in which the inner layer being covered by the outer layers. These layers are given names. For example, the covering of the five elements is called Sthula Sharira or gross body. The covering of the senses, life force, mind, intellect, ego, and the moral sense is called Linga Sarira or gendered body. The covering comprising the Chitta, Guna, and Karma is called Sukshma Sharira or subtle body. Finally, the covering comprising the various components of Maya is called Karan Sharira or causal body. All these bodies are ways of classifying a very complex reality into simpler parts. For instance, instead of the 36 components of Tantra or the 24 components of Sāñkhya, we can just talk about four bodies. This simplification has its usefulness if we want to see the big picture of reality. The simplicity becomes complicated when we want to understand the same reality in greater detail. The Karan Sharira or the causal body comprises the components of Maya. It is considered the seed from which the whole material existence springs. Therefore, all over Vedic texts we find exhortations to get out of Maya. Getting out means that Maya is a covering or a body, and we must leave that body to become free or liberated from inferiority. Since we can leave the body, therefore, the body is not eternally our body. Of course, Maya is eternal in the sense that even when we get out of Maya, someone else may be covered by the same type of Maya. Getting out of Maya means getting rid of the personal sense of inferiority, insecurity, and inadequacy, which paralyzes a person into sleep. When one is freed from Maya, then he is always joyful, enthusiastic, and confident. That confidence is not about dominating others. It is about voluntarily serving others or remaining self absorbed without the desire to dominate others or be dominated by them. The Sukshma Sharira or the subtle body is a covering on top of Maya. As we have discussed, Maya paralyzes a person, but he becomes re energized when he receives Shakti or power. However, due to the previous sense of inferiority, inadequacy, and insecurity, the power or Shakti is used to become the master or ruler of others. When the inferiority doesn't exist, then Shakti is used to serve. But under the influence of inferiority, the same Shakti is used to dominate others. In that process, whoever has more Shakti subordinates others. The Shakti becomes domination and subordination. The Shakti comprises the Chitta, Guna, and Karma. Chitta is all the abilities of a person. Guna is all the proclivities of a person. And Karma is all the opportunities of a person. Subsequent development occurs from the combination of ability, proclivity, and opportunity. For example, when our proclivity is to seek superiority through music, then to prove our superiority, we try to acquire better musical ability. Then we seek opportunities to demonstrate our ability and establish our superiority over others. At other times, we might see an opportunity to establish our superiority through music. Then we acquire the ability for music and gradually develop the proclivity for music. In this way, ability, proclivity, and opportunity may be causes or effects. However, they are not the root cause of the material existence. The root cause is Maya. Unless our sense of inferiority, insecurity, and incapacity is removed, the subsequent development remains inevitable. Thus, liberation from material entanglement is also described in many ways. In a rudimentary sense, when all the karma has been washed off, a person is said to be liberated. Factually, he is not fully liberated because he may still have material proclivities. But because he is freed from the limitations of opportunities, therefore he enjoys greater freedom. Similarly, if the chitta has been purified, then a person is freed from the limitations of ability. He is still not fully liberated because he might have material proclivities, but he is not being limited by his abilities. Even if one's material proclivities have been washed away, he may still occasionally suffer from inferiority, insecurity, and incapacity. Therefore, until Maya has been removed, a person is not fully liberated. The Linga Sharira or the gendered body comprises the senses, the mind, and the three instruments of judgment. We can say that the gendered body is sensation, cognition, and judgment. These are not the same for different genders. For example, males and females have different moral values, personal goals, and ideological beliefs. They have different kinds of thoughts. Males and females also have different preferences for sensations. This is why gender is defined in terms of the senses, the mind, and the three instruments of judgment, rather than the body of five elements. This is in contrast to how male and female are defined at present in terms of genes or genitals. As we can see at present, the genes and genitals can be one gender while the person feels to be another gender. That is because the genes and genitals are the gross body, which is a secondary determinant of gender compared to the senses, the mind, and the three types of judgments. A person can mutilate their gross body, but by that they will not become the opposite gender. For example, men cannot start bearing children even if they mutilate their bodies. They may have the proclivity of women, but they don't have the ability and opportunity of women. An incompatibility between the proclivity, ability, and opportunity is the result of one's previous actions. When a person performs good deeds, then their proclivity, ability, and opportunity are aligned. Therefore, those who understand how the gendered body is created from the subtle body will advise people to live patiently with their current body and perform their duties to the best of their ability. In their next birth, they will again get ability and opportunity suitable to their proclivity. However, when the understanding of karma and reincarnation is lost, then people think that they only live once. They try to mutilate their bodies to enjoy their single life the most, but they do not succeed. Finally, the Sthula Sharira or the gross body comprises the life force called prana, properties called tanamatra, and their individual instances called bhuta. The structure of the body, or what biologists call the phenotype, is created by the life force or prana. As we have discussed, prana takes multiple forms in case of perception. That is the function of prana in relationship to the mind and the senses. Similarly, there is a bodily function of prana which is divided into 5 parts, which becomes responsible for ingestion, digestion, circulation, excretion, and expression. The expressive power of the prana is utilized during cell replication when one cell clones itself into another cell. This cloning is just like a person uttering their thoughts into speech. After the utterance, the person doesn't forget his ideas. However, a clone of that thought is created as speech. Each cell in the body is a tiny organism, part of multiple layers of organisms. There is an inner hierarchy within each body, which is why the body is sometimes compared to a society or a universe. The higher rungs in the universe control the lower rungs. The higher rungs of a society control the lower rungs. This organizational hierarchy of control is prana. It is just like an organizational hierarchy of the government or a company. It defines roles and functions without populating them with individuals. The individuals that occupy these functional positions are the bhuta. Thus, the body has 2 tiers of description. The first is a structural functional tier, and the second is a material tier. We cannot perceive the structural functional tier of reality with our senses or instruments, but we can see the effects of this structural functional organization in the changes to the bhuta. Bhuta and prana are studied in modern science incorrectly as matter and force. Matter is modeled as physical particles rather than embodiments of sense percepts, while force is modeled physically rather than as life force. A physical force spreads throughout the universe, but life force is generally confined within a body. Life force can also spread throughout the universe, but that is a very rare case. Highly empowered persons have a life force that can spread limitlessly. For most living entities, their life force is limited to something around their bodies. Similarly, the life force can be controlled by the mind, but physical forces are not so controllable. Due to this physical conception of matter and force, modern science eliminates the mind. But that same science cannot explain how an organism has the properties of self-control, self-defense, self-ambition, self-replication, self-cognition, and self-correction. After all, when there is no concept of self, then how can all the properties of the self be understood? Thereby, physical theories of matter fail terribly in describing, explaining, and predicting how an organism emerges from physics or mathematics. Based on the 4 types of bodies, there are other summary descriptions of reality. One such description is Karta, Karan, Karan, and Karya. Karta means a doer. He can do things, but he doesn't automatically do anything. He needs a reason to do something. The reason is Karan. It is the nearest to the doer. When the doer has a reason to do something, he uses a Karan or an instrument. That instrument was previously lying inactive in a potential state, but it is activated due to the action of a doer who was activated by a reason. When the instrument is activated, then a karya or effect is produced. The world we perceive is a karya or effect. But behind that effect are instruments, behind those instruments are reasons, and behind the reasons are doers. Thus, even the simplest description of the material reality involves a hierarchy of effects, instruments, reasons, and doers. This fourfold hierarchy is also called para, pasyanti, madhyama, and vaikari. The topmost level is eternal and transcendental, while the lower three levels are temporary and material. Of course, even matter is eternal as a potential, but its activation is temporary. If we find it hard to understand the complicated terminology of Sāñkhya and Tantra, we can also understand it through the four tiers that I have called unconscious, preconscious, subconscious, and conscious. As I have noted earlier, these terms are not used in the Vedic texts. However, they are prevalent in modern usage and they can be used to explain the same situation. However, we must clarify what each word means. The use of the same word doesn't always indicate the presence of the same meaning. By the unconscious, we mean the innate fear, jealousy, insecurity, weakness, and helplessness in each person. It is not visible to us from the outside. Most people are unaware of their own fears, insecurities, jealousies, weaknesses, and helplessness. But we can see their effects in the conscious realm. By the preconscious, we mean the abilities, proclivities, and opportunities one has to fight against the previous insecurity. Due to the preconscious, a living entity projects an image of strength, power, capability, and independence outwardly, even as he remains insecure and fearful within. By the subconscious, we mean the cultural, civilizational, ideological, religious, and social values, beliefs, and goals. If we want, we can examine these in greater detail, but most people living in a culture, society, civilization, religion, and society mostly remain unaware of their own values, beliefs, and goals. Still, we see their effects on the body, so they are not invisible. Finally, by the conscious, we mean the cognitions, sensations, and actions that we are intimately aware of. These are in turn influenced by the unconscious fears, the preconscious projection of strength, and the subconscious beliefs, values, and goals. Thus, everything is reflected in the conscious realm as an effect of a deeper reality. We cannot see a person's insecurity, but we can see its effects. We cannot see a person's ability, proclivity, and opportunity, but we can see their effects. We cannot see a person's goals, beliefs, and values, but we can see their effects. We cannot see a person's sensations, thoughts, and judgments, but we can see their effects. We cannot see the mechanisms of self defense, self correction, self ambition, self enjoyment, self cognition, and self control, but we can see their effects. Modern science tries to model all effects using physical properties and mathematical equations. In short, there is an attempt to model helplessness and insecurity as mathematics. There is an attempt to model innate ability, proclivity, and opportunity as mathematics. There is an attempt to model morals, beliefs, and goals as mathematics. There is an attempt to model sensations, cognitions, and actions as mathematics. There is an attempt to model self defense, self correction, self ambition, self enjoyment, self cognition, and self control as mathematics. Obviously, the whole attempt results in a catastrophic failure. But even if someone realizes that, they don't change their approach. They marginalize the importance of what they cannot explain. It can be likened to the sour grapes mentality. The monkey who could not get the grapes rationalized his failure by calling the grapes sour and hence not worthy of being pursued. Those who are serious about the truth, however, go very deep into understanding the deeper recesses of their existence through introspection. They don't rely on the instrument measurements of effects because even if we know the effect, we don't know the causes. But if we know the causes, then we can also know the effects. In fact, once we understand the immense complexity of reality through introspection, then we understand that the observable effects cannot be explained, predicted, or described completely and consistently unless we know the deeper aspects of matter. This is then the value in studying Sāñkhya and Tantra. We get to understand the deeper recesses of reality. It can be verified by introspection. Therefore, it is accessible to everyone. It is not blind faith or imaginary belief. It can be rationally explained. Therefore, it is scientific. Anyone who studies Sāñkhya and Tantra sincerely will find that its description constitute an alternative science.